Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Rod Hembree here with Talk to Me, a program that, of course, is the counter to the regular program, the 6 days a week of Quick Study Television, Bible Discovery TV. Actually, it's Bible Discovery TV Quick Study. And we want to welcome everybody joining us on Facebook and everybody joining us on YouTube and joining us by watching on demand. Good to have you here. I'm just looking for us, and I'll find us very soon, I should say. And I'm here with a special guest, and my guest, of course, is really, he calls me, there we are, he calls me his younger brother, and I call him my older brother. His name is Jim Cantelon. Jim, welcome. Good to have you here.
Good to be with you, Rod, as usual.
And we're going to talk about some interesting things related to how we are working with you. And I wanted to talk about, I'm just looking for us right now. I can't find us, but I'm looking for us, and I'll find us shortly.
No, Rod, I'm not used to working with somebody who doesn't know where he is.
I know, I'm not there. I found this. Yeah. I found us, Jim. There are people watching.
This is obviously a computer age, because normally you would look at yourself and say, oh, I'm here. But now, unless you're on the screen, you're not here.
I'm actually here, and I'm like 45 seconds delayed.
Oh, there you go.
So there you go.
That's very disconcerting.
So when you hear me say something, you hear Jim say something, remember we said that 45 seconds earlier. So that's important.
Yeah, that's very scary.
It is. Yeah. As a good ham radio operator, everybody knows that. Yeah. And I'd like to say hello to Diane Laura Gilbert. And also I'd like to say Alec is watching. Alec is your friend.
Yeah.
And he's my father-in-law.
Yeah.
And he's great. And I'm looking at him. And also, there's a couple of other people here, but I can't really see them, and I don't understand it. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here.
You know, you remind me of, you're too young to remember, but there used to be this children's show called Romper Room. Did you ever see Romper Room?
I saw Romper Room.
And at the end of the Romper Room, the gal would hold up this, it looked like a mirror, but it was, and she'd see through it. I see Rodney, and I see Al, and
this
I
is
see
very
Ruthie.
Important to you.
Yeah. And she never said, I see Jimmy. So I always felt overlooked. But now you're doing this here with...
Well, I see us here and all of that, and that's great. And we've got new people coming in as well. And so it is good to see everybody, and several people have joined us. So thank you so much. Jim, I wanted to talk about one of the things we don't do, and we don't do it for a reason. We have spent our time on the program talking primarily about, in fact, the Bible and how to study the Bible and all of that. And the Word of God is something that tells us to live it. You talk about the righteousness of God, looking up and seeing righteousness with God, but you talk about the justice of man, and that's spoken of in the Old Testament many times, and of course reinforced in the New Testament. But we don't spend time on it simply because we don't have time to spend on it. However, we are involved with missions.
Yeah.
We're involved very much with your organization, which is WOW.
Right.
Women and Orphans.
Working for Orphans and Widows.
Working for, I'll get that.
You'll get it eventually.
One of these days,
Yeah,
I'll get
okay.
it. Working for Orphans and Widows.
Yeah.
And first of all, that's interesting. Orphans and widows. What's that about? That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's the first question I'd like to ask you. But the second question is, you've been doing it for many years.
20 years.
And this is your 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
So my question is, how in the world are you doing? Like, you're working with orphans and widows. Yeah. How many orphans are there anymore? I mean, the ones you first started with, they're like 26 now.
Yeah, now they're young adults. And it's really quite a thing to meet them, actually. You know, it was interesting. When we started, it was something from the Lord. I was pastoring a very large church in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was called a mega church. I guess it was. I'm always a little, suspicious of any of these big words. But in the context of being there, the Lord began to expose me to something that was happening in East Vancouver, and that was almost an epidemic of HIV and AIDS. And I had never had interest in HIV and AIDS until that time. And I began to investigate it because our church was smack dab right in the middle of East Vancouver, which is the poorest postal code in all of Canada.
Wait. Poorest postal code
in all of Canada.
So when you say postal code, you're talking about like a zip code.
No, we're talking about a zone, yeah.
So you lived
well, my church,
in the poorest zone?
My church right in the middle of it, a very, very impressive, expensive, multi-million-dollar church, smack dab in the middle of the greatest poverty in all of Canada. Total juxtaposition, kind of a strange mix, really. And so I started wandering, around my, if you will, in my parish. And there I began to investigate and discovered that most of the people who were HIV positive were Aboriginal women. And
So that's women who are, of course, part of the Native people.
that's right, Native peoples. And I began to dig deeper and discovered that East Vancouver has the highest intravenous drug-related HIV rate in the world. I mean,
So this is a world-class thing now. This is like,
this is like blowing me away. I'm pastoring this big church, and within blocks of my church are all of these precious women who've been created by the Lord in His image, who are emaciated. Some of them can hardly stand. I would walk through the alleyways around that area, and I'd see some women, leaning against the walls, some on the ground, some collapsed. I'd see syringes and condoms and all kinds of human refuse, and I just can't believe it. And so I started to dig deeper. I discovered some of the little rescue missions that were trying to help these people, and I started helping them. And I would bring them in, the people who were doing these little rescue missions, into my big church once a month, and I'd feed them full of good food, and we'd sit for a couple hours. I'd say, talk to me about your ministry, and how can we help you, and how can we pray with you? And slowly, I became immersed in, the justice-seeking aspect of the gospel. I'm a preacher, so are you. I come from a line of preachers, so do you. I think we're both third-generation preachers. And preaching is essentially a verbal activity. I mean, how can they hear except, they have a preacher? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I had never really been an activist in any sense that activism has any meaning. Well, I was kind of forced by this exposure in Vancouver to the need for Christian activism in terms of reaching out to the least, the last, and the lost. I began to research HIV and AIDS on the internet and discovered that it's the greatest orphan and widowmaker in the history of mankind. And what does James 1:27 say? Mm-hmm. Pure religion undefiled. The kind of religion that God endorses is to visit the orphan and widow in their distress and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. What do you got there? You have righteousness and justice. That's what you have. Righteousness and justice is something I've been preaching for 40 years. Rooted in the Old Testament, followed through in the New Testament. God's expectation of us is to be in right relationship with Him, right relationship with one another. You can't have one without the other. You say you love God, don't love your neighbor, you're a liar. That's pretty strong, huh? And I realized that there was a bit of a gap. Certainly in terms of my life and ministry, I was, very strong on righteousness. I wasn't very good on justice. So, the upshot of it is, Rod, that I set up a federal corporation, at that time called Vision Led. Vision Led is still the corporate name, but we now...
You did this in Vancouver?
I did Vancouver, and we now work as Working for Orphans and Widows. Working for Orphans and Widows is a ministry of Vision Led, VISIONLEDD. But anyway, over the last 20 years, we have been pursuing the far horizon in sub-Saharan Africa. Now we're in India as well. And just following the Lord's lead with this determination that I want every church to be a Mother Teresa. I want every church to be ministering to the least, the last, and the lost. That's what I want. Now, I'm not saying that's what the Lord wants, but that's what I want. That's what I feel my calling is to challenge churches to care for the poor, especially orphans and widows. You see, Psalm 68, God is a father to the fatherless and a defender of widows. That's what He is in His holy habitation. Now, that's pretty strong. I mean, if God has priorities, which He does, it starts with the orphan and the widow. And then you got James saying the orphan and the widow is what it's all about. And I'm not a rocket scientist, but I can put two and two together. And so I began to preach in Africa to churches who'd ever listened to me about righteousness and justice, about caring for orphans and widows. The upshot of it is, Rod, that we're involved now, heavily involved, in several parts of sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa, and also now in India, in Chennai, India. And it's all about orphans and widows. And I, if someone had said to me 20 years ago, you're going to have what we have, and I'm not going to brag about it, but it's an amazing thing what's going on, I would have hardly believed it, because what did I know? I didn't know anything. And now, here we are with Discovery TV, Bible Discovery. I'm still getting used to your new name, Bible Discovery. Partnering in, we've just started in Chennai, India, with orphans and widows, and also in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
This is amazing, because what you said was your own desire would be for every church to become
A Mother
this.
Teresa.
And a lot of people, when I grew up and I was in the church, and we always heard the missionaries talk about the different things they were doing and how we needed to help them and all of that. And it seemed as if, because when I was 17 years old, I traveled to India, traveled to the Philippine Islands, traveled to Hong Kong, and so on. And it seemed that there were people that were a lot less than us in terms of their possessions, in terms of what they had. And we had to give to them to help them the idea was to help them to bring up, if you would, their status. And that was interesting. But you're in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Vancouver is the place where people go from California to make movies. I mean, this is an amazing place.
Yeah.
Vancouver.
Yeah. No, it really caught me by surprise. I didn't expect.
What was your church that you had taken over, were they doing anything?
No. Well, they had some really sharp staff members who had a real heart for this, but they needed, the senior guy, which was me, to kind of give them permission to pursue it. And so with some really committed staff members, we started engaging the impoverished people just within the East Vancouver area who were within, 1 or 2 miles of our church. We ended up with a working relationship with 1,500 underprivileged homes. We had a kind of a partner relationship with the Salvation Army and a kind of a restaurant van that would bring hot meals to these impoverished families. We began to cast vision for, and now there is an actual kind of youth center, which is a part of the church complex that ministers to kids in that area. It was a slow build, but it was because of the exposure I had to these Aboriginal women who were dying of HIV and AIDS that the Lord really kickstarted me into what we are now doing with WOW. WOW, by the way, if people want to see it, it's wowmission.com.
Wowmission.com.
Yeah, it's very easy.
Wowmission.com.
Yeah, www.mission.com. Yeah.
Okay. Because that's important, because you're no longer at the church, and obviously, you've gone on and you've developed the WOW, which was vision-led originally. Yeah. And so this is absolutely amazing, because to see every church become like this, and let me just say thank you to everybody who's watching and everybody who's a part of this. Let me ask you, if you have questions that you'd like to ask Jim about this, or me, whatever, then put them in the chat room, and Rebecca will get them from you. And Rebecca, bless your heart, Rebecca, you're a good person. I'm going to ask you to bring those questions, write them down, and bring questions in when you have them, Rebecca.
That's very
please.
low tech. That's very low tech. I'm
well,
shocked.
I mean, she could Skype me.
Yeah, mind you can't
You
find
can
yourself.
Skype me, Rebecca.
Yeah, you can't find yourself, so you're not going to find those notes. But
yes.
Rod, it's not. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not complicated. I believe that the Lord who is in heaven has a real heart for the orphan and the widow. It's just that there's not a lot of churches and Christians out there who seem to be aware of the needs of those who are right around them. I mean, most people in Vancouver, for instance, might have no idea that this is happening in their backyard. But there's no point in laying guilt on anybody, but the point is, as soon as you, if you will, open the door of your life to the needs of the least, the last, and the lost, as soon as you open the door of your life to that, it's like our Father who is in heaven says, "Oh, finally," and He just kind of floods you with opportunity, and then in doing that, supplies the need you have, because it's a very costly thing caring for people who are in desperate situations. So what we do is we focus, and this is what we're doing with you. We focus on home-based care for orphans and widows. Mm-hmm. For many years, we did a number of things like drilling wells, like building schools, and all of these were good. But what we learned in 18 years, we've just switched gears in the last year and a half, is that the real gut issue is food security and crisis intervention when there is great illness, and the protection of women and girls from sexual predation.
All right, so that's an important part wherever you're at.
Yeah. And so home-based care, HBC for short, is what we specialize in. And we have scores and scores, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of orphans and widows now that we are caring for, not through us directly, but through the volunteers and the churches from those that are pastoring those volunteers on the ground in Africa. So it's all Africans to Africans. It's Indians to Indians. There's no white guy in the mix. The only time they see the white guy is when I come in a couple times a year to, speak to them, to encourage them. And I always want to speak with pastors, and I get a lot of pastors showing up for little 2 and 3 day mini conferences on righteousness and justice. But, as our relationship develops in this area, you'll come with me once in a while and you see for yourself.
Mm-hmm. I look forward to coming with you to India as well.
Yeah. Well, India for sure. And especially in that, your sort of initial imprint in overseas ministry was India.
In fact, it was, and India is a great country.
Oh, yeah.
It's the second largest country in the world,
Yeah.
1.3 billion people, amazing.
Yeah.
And I haven't been there in a long time, so I look forward to the chance where we can go.
Now, here's something interesting, Rod. This really blows me away. We have just stuck our toe in the water, really, in Chennai, India. Okay, but we're already involved now with a marvelous ministry that's caring for orphans and widows. Chennai, India. Where is Chennai, India? You asked me that question. Where is Chennai, India? Chennai, India is on the coast in southern India. Southern India is the epicenter of Christianity in Asia. Why? Because St. Thomas, as we call him now, Thomas the Doubter, one of Jesus' disciples, the guy who really had his brain in gear, not convinced that Jesus had risen from the dead, and was finally convinced by Jesus' appearance and his kindness in showing him the holes in his hands and his side. He, after the resurrection, migrated to southern India, and he started ministering the gospel there, the story of Jesus and the resurrection. And today, in Chennai, his body is still there. He's buried there. There's a beautiful cathedral built over his grave. There's a beautiful shrine right up on a mountain in the middle of Chennai. Chennai's got 9 million people living there. Get this, 5,000 churches in Chennai.
9 million people, 5,000 churches.
5,000 churches, and every one of them can trace their roots, directly or indirectly, to the impact of one man, Thomas the Doubter. I just
Everybody,
love it.
that is great.
I just love it. And here we are now. Thomas planted the seed.
Yeah.
About 2,000 years ago, and there we are, going in and co-laboring with him. I mean, how cool is that?
It is.
That's
it's
a connection to
absolutely
the New Testament.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely cool. I'll tell you, that is something that we need to think through and understand. But just to be honest with you about this, Barry Armstrong is watching, and he says hi.
Oh, hello. Hello, Barry.
So, Barry, you're a good man, brother. Good to hear you. Good to see you. And also, it says here, this is interesting, hello from Karen all the way from Texas.
Oh.
So, thank you, Karen.
Where in Texas,
And,
I wonder?
yeah, where do you, when you say Texas, that's great, but that's a huge state.
I mean, Texas is as big as the world.
Well, yeah, almost, yeah.
And I have a daughter who lives in Texas. So I'd like to know where in Texas she is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, and then a comment from Renee on YouTube. So thankful you've been open to the Lord's leading in your life. Though I still do miss you and Moira hosting Huntley Street. That was one of my favorite times. I grew in my walk with Jesus very much. Thank you. And that is from, of course, Renee. Renee, just so you understand, those were great times.
Oh,
we
yeah.
had David, we had you, we had Moira. I was the producer.
Yeah, you were the producer.
And we had some great times.
Yeah, it was an era. It was an era, and it was a good era. Everything has a shelf life, Rod. We know this. All of our lives have shelf life. Ministries have shelf life. Mm-hmm. And it just so happened that we were right there on the best time in the history of Crossroads. David was terrific, and you kept us all between the dishes. and Moira and I had a kind of a love-hate relationship.
It was hilarious.
a lot of humor. And she's terrific. I really think a lot of her. And her husband, Richard, became my my right-hand man in the first 16 years of WOW. So
Yeah.
I'm very connected even to this day.
And Richard, of course, was the administrator for my father at KRT back in 80 to 83.
It's a small world.
So
Right?
it is a small
Small
world.
world. 6
it really
degrees
is.
of separation,
Yeah.
as they say. Yeah.
Another question from Diane on Facebook. She says, the needs are so many. How does one go about ministering to those with so many needs when one has a problem budgeting for one's month-to-month work and the paycheck to paycheck?
You know, the Lord doesn't ask us to do what we can't do, nor does he ask any of us to save the world ourselves. All he asks us to do is to do what we can do and to be salt and light in that context. So whether you're the widow with 2 mites or whether you're a multimillionaire with several millions to throw around, the point is, from God's point of view, he owns a cattle on 1,000 hills. Money doesn't impress him. I mean, he paves his streets with gold, all right? Mm-hmm. You know, the thing that our whole world revolves around and lusts after and fights wars over is pavement, okay? Let's keep that in perspective. Our values are not heaven's values. So when it comes to whether or not we have a lot of money or a little money, that's irrelevant to the Lord. What's relevant to the Lord is our heart of compassion. And I really mean this. One of the most valuable things you can ever do is to pray. To pray for the afflicted. To pray for those who are ministering to the afflicted. And if you can help them with $1 a month, you help them with $1 a month. If you can help them with $1,000 a month, you do that. But you do it unto the Lord. You do it in gratitude. And the Lord honors a buck as much as he honors a million. That doesn't matter to him. Everything's relative. What matters to him is your heart.
That's very important. And I think that we in this world have become so time bound through Facebook, YouTube, and a lot of people are watching on Facebook right now. But we are so time bound that we don't think about praying because it takes time. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, please put it in the Rebecca Hembree's, or put it in the chat room, and Rebecca will text it to me. So I've got it here.
So now she's texting us. She's not bringing in a note?
No, she's texting me, yes.
Whoa.
So
That's progressive.
It's progressive, I'm telling you. Anyway, so Rebecca's continuing to do that, but we'll take your questions. But Jim, again, if we think this through and we begin to understand, if we begin to pray, how do you do that? What, do you just pray for the world, or do you have something specific you pray for?
Well, this is where it's helpful if you have some kind of relationship with a ministry. And it can be Bible Discovery, it can be WOW, it can be both, it can be World Vision, it can be, whatever, World Evangelical Alliance. If you have some kind of a connection, then they, keep you up to speed in terms of some of the things they're involved in. And you can come alongside, and say, okay, Rod is stressing work with orphans and widows in India right now. He's working with Jim. It's just starting. They've got probably a lot of challenges in the startup mode. Dear Father, help them to, find a straight path and to make good decisions. That's a very helpful thing to do.
That's very important.
Very
important.
And then, okay, so now they're starting with X number of orphans, X number of widows. It costs 50 cents a day to care for a widow in India. Can you believe it?
50 cents.
50 cents a day, okay? All right, so
most people spend 3 times that amount on coffee.
Yeah, so I've got $2 a month of ready cash. Well, guess what? That's 4 widows I can help care for. So you take it on the basis of a relationship with a ministry. That ministry communicates to you where they're at, what their needs are, and then you pray about those needs, and you support them to the extent you can support them in seeing those needs filled. See, the Lord could just make money grow on trees for us, Rod. He could have a Bible Discovery tree. He could have a WOW tree, and we could just go and take off $100 bills whenever we wanted them. That would make a lot of sense. But no, it wouldn't make a lot of sense, because the Lord wants us to be dependent on Him, and we're dependent on Him by being dependent on His people. He wants to do this work through His body, which is the church. And we have to regard and respect the church as the body of Christ, and humbly, come to the church with the needs and receive what the church provides, and then be good stewards and do it all to the glory of God.
Again, the amount is not necessarily important.
No.
But what's important is the commitment.
Yeah.
To stop making excuses, but just to say, look, I've got $1 a month.
Yeah.
And we have somebody who supports us here at Bible Discovery TV at $1 a month.
Yeah.
And I know that for a fact. And we have other people who support us more. Thank you so much. But thank you for the $1 a month. That's excellent. The idea is that people will give something. They will focus on something. They'll pray for the ministry. That's number one, because that's the most important. And number two, they'll consider giving to the ministry. See, this is the challenge. In the last generation, I think one of the biggest fallacies has been the prosperity doctrine over abused.
Yeah.
You know, give $1, you'll get 100 back.
Right.
You know, and that's what everybody jumped all over, and everybody got rich through it and all that stuff. I say everybody, I'm talking about people who are broadcasting that. But the prosperity doctrine is not there for prosperity, although Jesus prospers some people, of course. We all have our assignment from the Lord. Yeah. But we need to understand that when we begin to give, we give not to get, but we give so that we can help others to eat and to have clothes and to have school. Yeah. And because the world is not that equal. In fact, it's very satanic in some ways because it's bent on all kinds of things. But we need to remember that we are giving in missions, and we're giving to the organization wowmissions.com. We're giving to the organization because we understand that we're not going to get, but we're going to help.
Well, and the thing, you know, the old adage is more blessed to give than to receive. It's really true. You know from your own experience, as do I, that there is such a great satisfaction and fulfillment in helping meet someone's need. I mean, you're not giving for yourself, you're giving for the needs of someone else. Yeah. And also, it's good to remember that we are living in a very unrealistic world here in the West. You know, about 3/4 of the world, maybe 2/3, live on less than $2 a day. I mean, it's hard to believe this, but it's true.
And we're raising minimum wage here.
Oh yeah, and they look at us. You know, I know this is true because I spend so much time with the poorest of the poor. They look at Westerners and they figure that our streets are paved with gold and that we've got we got heaven on earth. We don't have food security issues. We don't have water issues. We don't have health care issues. We just have a wonderful, wonderful life. In many ways, that's absolutely true, compared to how the majority of the world lives. So one of the things that I had to work on in the first few years, I would be, with the poorest of the poor for 3-4 weeks. I'd come back to Toronto, and I'd get mad at my fellow Canadians complaining about stuff. Complaining about their wages, or complaining about the quality of health care, or complaining about this, complaining about that. I just come from, a setting where there is no hospital, where there is no health care, where there is no food, where children have no parents. One of the things that kills me, Rod, is children raising themselves. Orphan-led households, and I have been in many of those humble little mud huts with kids raising themselves. I mean, you see this, but I realized that it was counterproductive for me to come back and get mad. I had to make the same cross-cultural adaptation to my own culture as I was making to the African culture. I had to make those adaptations both ways. So part of the challenge for me wasn't just jet lag, it was culture lag, And now, after 20 years of doing it, I pretty much know how to do it. Just like I know how to drive on the left-hand side of the road now without any problem, because I do it so much in Africa. But, it's a big world out there. And thank God that he so loves the world. If it weren't for the love of God, I mean, you and I would be...
It would be history.
Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. And whatever it is we do, in whatever small measure, is purely an act of gratitude for the love of God. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong. I mean, I just can never get over God's love. And so I find myself spending most of my time when I'm praying just being thankful.
Of course.
I decided, Rod, I don't know if this is heresy or not, that I wouldn't waste a lot of God's time by asking him for stuff. I decided this years ago, I am not going to be a high-maintenance child of God. I'm going to be a low-maintenance child of God. I'm just going to enjoy his presence, enjoy his empowering, and pray for other people, not for myself.
Yeah, people are the key.
Yeah, and then, My kids get a kick out of this because it's not. I don't recommend this to anyone else. Sundays, I don't ask God for anything. I figure I'll give him a day off. But I try to imagine what it must be like for our Heavenly Father, with hundreds of millions of people. Gimme, 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 gimme. I need. It's all legit, but it's not exactly fellowship. Our Father wants to be in fellowship with us. So sometimes we need to get beyond our needs and just have a good conversation.
I mean, the times that the Lord spends with us and the time we spend with the Lord, I spend a lot of time in prayer as well. And the time is, and there are times I've been praying and the Lord says, stop. And I'm like, okay. He said, how you doing, God? And he begins to fill me with his Spirit.
Yeah.
And this is something that we need to remember is we have to allow ourselves to stop for a minute and to do that.
The Bible talks about praying without ceasing. Well, prayer, I believe, is 95% listening. Mm-hmm. So it's listen without ceasing.
Yeah.
Listen to what the Spirit is saying to you. You've been driving your car, or walking through the woods, or sitting at your kitchen table, and you can be hearing from the Spirit of God without being weird. I don't like weird Christians.
Weird people.
I don't like people who are spiritualizing God all the time. It really bugs me. And as a pastor for almost 50 years, I've had to deal with more than my share of weirdness. Yeah. especially when I was I planted and pastored King of Kings in Jerusalem for all those years. Jerusalem.
That would be amazing. Jerusalem actually would have been a perfect place to get weird.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people go there and get weird.
Well, there's actually a condition. There's a condition in Jerusalem called the Jerusalem syndrome.
The Jerusalem syndrome.
See, it attracts a lot of marginal, flaky people, okay, who all have their view of the end time, and they're coming to Jerusalem to see their interpretation of the end time fulfilled, okay? So they're all there kind of with this look in their eyes. And because the church we planted became the biggest church in the country, they were always coming to me for my endorsement of their weird interpretations of end time.
They want you to say yes to them.
Yeah, because if they could say, Cantelon endorses my message, then they could go to these little congregations of Jewish believers around Israel and say, Cantelon's on side with me. So and I just, for the first few years, I was nice to these people. And then I had a marvelous revelation.
You don't have to be nice to them.
Nice is not a fruit of the Spirit. Praise the Lord. And I started being hard, and asking hard questions. But the point I'm making is, we have so much to learn. The Apostle Paul put it this way in 1 Corinthians 13. Now we see through a glass darkly. We don't really see very much.
No.
And for people who claim to know all of this about God, they've got this inside track to the Lord, I'm saying be careful, because we see through a glass darkly. Everything that we see is like through a spiritual astigmatism. And we have to acknowledge the fact that there's much more about God we don't know than what we do know. So don't come across as this know-it-all, Bible-bashing Christian who's pounding people in the head with the Bible, because that's counterproductive. It's wrong. It even might be called fanatical. Mm-hmm. I love, by the way, Santayana, the philosopher Santayana's definition of a fanatic. You ready for this?
Please.
A fanatic is someone who, having lost sight of his goal, redoubles his effort.
Lost sight of his goal, and he redoubles his effort.
Yeah,
very good.
Yeah. But, I'm a sports fan. Fan is short for fanatic.
Of course it is.
I say go
Raptors.
I say go Raptors, Go Leafs go. Oh, that one didn't work very well.
You were the one who caused that. Anyway,
well, there you go.
Very good. Just want to say that Diane completely agrees with us, and she says that's not how God's work in terms of the prosperity doctrine. And let me just say that there are people I know who are good friends, and they will speak on the prosperity doctrine. God rewards you when you learn how to give and when you learn how to do things. But at the same time, that's not why you give. You don't give to get, but you give because you're giving.
Yeah.
And when you give, that's what you do. And I mean, the Lord, what I do is I pray, Lord, help me and give us this day our daily bread. I pray for my provision that God has supplied for me. In my lifetime, when the Lord looks at it, he sees my whole life. I say, okay, Lord, help me not to get in the way of what you have supplied for me, and which is I do a lot. And I say to the Lord, help me to remember my provision and help me to get it. So I think that's very important. And also, by the way, Alicia says hello on Facebook. Hi, Alicia. How are you? Good to see you. Let me talk to you about something because this is important. We've been talking about giving, and we've been talking about the missions, working for orphans and widows. I think one of the questions that I have is as we get into this, you started with Africa. Why did there's many people in the world that have trouble and many people that could need help, both here and also abroad. The status of our nation does not necessarily define the poor people, and you can certainly make that case in the United States of America.
Yeah.
But my question is, why did you start with Africa?
Oh, easy. I started in Africa because those are the ones I knew. You see, when I was pastoring in Jerusalem, Israel, for some reason, I mean, with all these people coming from all over the world, there were some really good people too, not just weirdos. And one day, one of the executive members of the Assemblies of God in South Africa was in my church service, and he was quite impressed with how things went. And he came up to me afterwards, introduced himself, and he said, "Jum." In South Africa, I'm not Jim, I'm Jum. It's not milk, it's mulk. Okay, they have a hard time saying the I letter. Anyway, Jum, would you consider coming down and speaking to our annual pastors' church retreat in South Africa? I said, sure. He said, okay. So anyway, the upshot of it is the South African Assemblies of God brought me and Kathy and our 3 kids down on several occasions, and I did their major general conference with 5,000 people. I did itinerations throughout all of South Africa, connecting with some of the emerging leaders. And I didn't realize then, a principle is true. Whatever God is doing in your life now is preparation for what he will be doing in the future. He's preparing me for something that would happen years later. Because when the Lord laid this on me, this orphans and widows issue, I realized that the epicenter of the HIV and AIDS crisis and orphans and widows was in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. KwaZulu-Natal is a province of South Africa, or a state, whatever you want to call it. That's where Durban is. And that 30% of the people were HIV positive.
30%.
30%
of the people.
Yeah. And so I connected with some of the pastors I knew in the KwaZulu-Natal area, and then also in Johannesburg, Pretoria, up in northern South Africa. And through an interesting sequence of events, through those connections, I began to reach out to churches, with my message of righteousness and justice and the care of orphans and widows. One thing led to another. So, you go with what you have in your hand. What I had in my hand was some long-term established relationships with South African churches. Okay? That's what I had in my hand. That was my asset. That was from my 7 years pastoring in Jerusalem. It's interesting how these things connect, right? Mm-hmm. So I started with what I knew, who I knew, what I had, and this led, to extensive ministry in not only South Africa, but also in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in Malawi, for a number of years in northern Uganda. And so, one thing leads to another. It's sort of, you just take one step at a time. I never really expect the Lord to show me the end game. I just say, Lord, what do you want me to do today? And I don't impose a 5-year plan on him. How?
You don't have a 5-year plan?
No, I don't have a 5-day plan. In fact, in the day of the internet, you can't have a 5-hour plan.
Yeah.
I mean, you got information going around the world twice a second. I mean, the day of the 5-year plan is, boy, so passé. Not saying be irresponsible or careless, but what I'm saying is, if you do believe in being led by the Spirit, then let the Spirit lead you. Okay? I mean, when we were dedicating the pavilion, as we call it now, where King of Kings meets in Jerusalem, this is a few years ago, beautiful complex that is built there. I was there, of course, and I spoke at the dedication ceremony, and there were people from all over the world, and of course, people were congratulating me. Oh, Jim, my goodness, this is amazing. It's great when a plan comes together, huh? I said, well, actually, I didn't have a plan. You didn't have a plan? No. How could I have planned this? Dear Lord, I want you to call me through the government of Israel to plant a church in Jerusalem. How could I plan that? How could I even have the temerity to pray that? Okay, and that was, of course, the next point. Well, you must have really bathed this in prayer. Hallelujah. No, I just tried to bathe today in prayer. Okay? Lord, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. I'm not going to borrow trouble from the future. That's why I don't worry. That's why I'm not anxious about anything. But if I can be faithful today to what the Lord's called me to put my foot today, then tomorrow, wherever I put my foot, will be built on where I put my foot the day before. But I don't live in the past. Man, if you live in the past, you're dead in the present. I live in the present. I let God look after the future. So anyway, I didn't mean to philosophize, Rod. Pardon me.
Yeah, but no, it's good.
Yeah, but the point being that it was dealing with what I knew, relationships I'd established, what I had in my hand, starting with that, and that's why I started in sub-Saharan Africa. And now, through the sub-Saharan African connections, I've been led to this marvelous ministry in Chennai, India, where we're working together with orphans and widows, and also to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and to 2 other marvelous ministries in South Africa, to another one in Ghana. And the Lord just kind of builds things, right? This beautiful studio you have here, you have to do it on a microphone at a time, right? I mean, here we got 2 great mics. We take them for granted. These are expensive things. Mm-hmm. How do you get that? You get it a step at a time, a dollar at a time. Faithfulness, 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 right?
Yep.
And that's how you build stuff, is with faithfulness.
So your building was not a plan. Your establishment of WOW was not some kind of super plan that you had in your head all along.
No.
But what you did was you said you went one day at a time in the present, and I think that's important. Yeah. I love what David Maines said at his board meeting one time. David Maines was the proprietor of 100 Huntley Street. He was a great man. He's an excellent man. And he said to the board, because they wanted a 5-year plan, and he, at the end of the meeting, he stopped and he said, I'll tell you what my 5-year plan is. I don't have one, and we're not going to have one. And I'll see you gentlemen later. And that's really important. So as you build then, what you can say is the Lord did this, because the Lord knows the past, the present, and the future. Yeah. So the Lord did this.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah.
It's important for us to get out of the way. I think that's great, Jim. We're going to talk about India, and we're going to talk about Tanzania. But Rex on Facebook wants to give, he says, give faithfully and know that God provides needs and not wants. That is so good, Rex. Yeah. Thank you for that opportunity to talk about this.
And by the way, that's a good point. That's a good point. The Lord gives you what you need, not what you want.
And, I've seen people who are, they're at a local facility here in town, and they get the free lunch and all of that because they're trying to help people. And, you see them later at dinner that night in the restaurant. And you're like, what are you doing in the restaurant? Yeah. And, they get money from the government. So they have money and they have a place with running water and heat and everything else. And so you ask yourself the question, what is the need? Yeah. And is the need more spiritual than it is? And they feel like their need is they need lunch when they've had breakfast and dinner planned already. And so it becomes important for us to recognize that. And that's very critical when we understand that. Anyway.
When I was 5 years old, I prayed mightily for a pony. I wanted a pony. And the Lord did not answer my prayer.
He didn't answer your need.
No, and at 5 years of age, it's hard to deal with that theologically.
Yeah.
But my father helped me with that.
I love Homer Cantelon.
Yeah, Homer Cantelon, what a great
man.
guy he was. Jimmy, if God gives you a pony, where are you going to keep him?
Yeah.
How are you going to feed him? Are you going to exercise him every day? Are you going to take him to the vet when he's sick? We don't have any money for food. You're going to have money for medicine? Yeah. My dad was a remarkable guy. And so the Lord sometimes in his grace and kindness says no to what we ask him for.
Thank God.
Because he doesn't want to spoil us. He doesn't want to ruin us.
Yep. Because your need, that wasn't a need, that was a want.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to understand when we pray that if we have a need, let's focus on those needs. And primarily, I like the statement that you made about praying for people, because that's what I do. Yeah. We need to pray for people. People are the ones that we need to really pray for. Yeah. And that becomes very, very important. All right. I wanted to talk about India for a minute, because that's India's, if you want to get me excited about something, you talk about India. And I did not know that you were exploring India. I did not know that. I had no idea. Right. I just decided that we needed to give you some resources, so we did that. And we started doing that on a regular basis. And my question was, and I prayed, and I said, Lord, help us to do the right thing with the resources that you've given us and how you've done it in the United States and all the rest of it. Help us to do it. And he specifically spoke to me about WOW. Specifically, so you were the one.
Yeah.
And this is about a year ago,
Yeah.
or whenever that was. And I began to pray, Lord, help me to understand where this money goes. And then immediately, you said, you're looking at a possibility in India.
Yeah.
What struck in my heart was, wherever I put your foot,
Yeah.
that's where I'm going to give you. For a minister,
Yeah.
what that means to me, give me means the ministry of that place.
Yeah.
And so that was a really important
You
thing.
set your foot on India's soil when you were 17, and it had a huge impact on you. There's a definite principle there.
In fact, we drove down through Shania.
Yeah.
We drove down through there.
Yeah.
And that was when we had interesting problems with our taxi and everything else. But yeah, the Lord works.
Now, it's a huge country. It's right now very, what's the word, volatile. It's Hindu majority. A lot of Hindu extremists are giving Muslims a very hard time, and also Christians a very hard time. The government are not really very keen on Christian missions and Christian ministries. In fact, a lot of Christian ministries have had to leave India in the last few years. But having said that, the genius of working with local ministries and local churches is that the local churches are there. They're not coming from the outside. They're not foreign. They're there. They have a track record. They have a presence. And the ministry that we connected with in Chennai has been working with the poor for 30 years. Their track record is terrific. They have proven their faithfulness over the years. And they're wonderful guys, a father and a son. And I trust them. Now, they've got to trust me. And when they meet you, they got to trust you, and they will. But the point is, Rod, we're starting small there. I could have started bigger, but I don't like to start big and then have to reduce things. I'd rather start small and increase things.
Yeah.
As a relationship is proven, I'm not careless. I'm not going to throw money away, because every money represents someone's gift. So I got to be responsible. But one of the things that's very unique about the Chennai situation, two things actually. One is we are working in the largest slum in Southeast Asia. The largest slum in Southeast Asia. 1.5 million people living in a slum.
1.5 million people.
Yeah, in a slum.
Living in a slum.
Living in a slum. Now, it's a slum like no other. It's a slum like I've not seen anywhere else in the world. When I went there for the first time, I was expecting to see what I've seen in Nairobi, what I've seen in the regular townships around Jerusalem. I expected to see shacks, with tin or plastic roofs and mud and handmade bricks and cement buildings. I thought it's like this small city of cement buildings. Well, the government built this. They did away with the shacks, and they built these very basic buildings, and they gave every family one room and a half room for a kitchen, and a bathroom they share with 2 or 3 other units. A couple of windows, no windows, no glass in the windows, no screening in the windows, no air conditioning. But the point is, it is some shelter from the rain, and it never really gets cold in Chennai, but it's some shelter from the elements. But the point is this: it's still populated with people who have nothing. And so this little ministry that we're connecting with there, and we're going to strengthen their arm, is working on several levels with orphans and widows. But what's really cool about the widow work they're doing there right now, we're going to expand it, but they work with elderly widows. I've worked with elderly widows here and there in Africa, but this is a whole group of elderly widows who have been pushed out of their family homes and or their extended family social network because of their faith in Jesus.
So they're Christian.
Yeah, they're Christian widows. And they're humble little women. I met with about 30 of them a few months ago. Kind, soft-spoken. One gal, she was in her 90s, which is very unusual in India to live that long. asking nothing, and they're able to be sustained with 50 cents a day.
50 cents a day.
50 cents a day.
Living in these concrete homes.
Yeah, yeah. So we just sent our first allocation of funding that comes from Bible Discovery through WOW. And this first allocation is going almost exclusively to a group of about 60 elderly widows.
Praise God, that's great.
These are lovely old women whose only hope is Jesus. And so I know it sounds a little highfalutin, but I can't think of a better metaphor. We are presenting the hands and feet of Christ to them.
That's great.
Yeah. Through this church, actually it's a church, we're behind the church, we're supporting the church, but the church is the hands and feet of Jesus to these widows. Without the hands and feet of Jesus through that church, they would die. Alone.
So they're alive and they're living and
loving Jesus.
And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and here's the thing. They've been created in the image of God, just like you and I have. They have spirits just like you and I have. They have brains just like you and I have. And they have time to pray, and they pray like crazy. They are prayer warriors. So who wouldn't want an army of 60 women praying for your ministry?
I'm telling you, it's great.
I mean, it's just, you talk about cost efficient. And then there's the widows that are the orphans that are being cared for. What we're doing right now is we're making sure they have food security and also medical care when they need it. And this is one of the things that we do, and you and I will be talking about this. We're not doing it in India yet, but we will be doing it if we can do it through the government. The government is very, very... See, we have to protect our partners on the ground in India. It's social justice ministry. It's not even... If you say you're doing evangelism...
Yeah, you can't say that.
Government shuts you down.
Yeah.
And they lose their charitable status.
Yeah.
And so we can do things in the name of Jesus, and we can pray with people privately, and of course that's happening all the time. Mm-hmm. But it's not an evangelistic outreach, okay? And I think people understand that. But the point is that these little kids, they're being nurtured with food, with medicine, and with a lot of care in the name of Jesus, and they're learning to love the Lord. And bottom
learning
line,
to love the Lord.
Learning to love the Lord. And bottom line, and we were talking earlier about some of the orphans I started out with 20 years ago who are now young adults. Many of them are working now on bachelor's degrees. And every one of them we've put through a very intensive Bible training program. And as a part of their qualifications for this Bible training is they have to spend about 10 hours a week doing social justice work in the villages with orphans and widows themselves. So, what goes around comes around, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And they, they're naturals for this because they can relate to orphans because they're orphans.
Yeah, exactly.
They grew up as orphans.
Exactly.
And widows, anyway, it's, as you can tell, I'm an old guy, chronologically, but...
You're not old, but anyway.
Internally, I live in this bubble of delusion. I think I'm 40 and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, okay.
or I could say I'm 39 plus taxes, and the taxes are increasing every year.
Well, taxes always increase.
Yeah.
But the good news is here that we wanted to bring this to you so you understand and so you get the fact that we're actually working with Jim, and this is really important. This is a very critical partnership for Bible Discovery TV. And I just need to let you know. And by the way, thank you, Diane, on Facebook. She says, it is important to make the difference between a need and a want. Of course, It took me a while to learn that. Well, praise God, Diane, you learned it. That's good, isn't it? Yeah. And when you can, even if you cut back on coffee, in Canada, coffee is expensive. It's $2 for the large cup, and it's $1.80 for the medium cup. And even if you save 20 cents a day and you begin to add that up and all that, then you come up with about if you could spare $10 a month, that would be great. That would help a lot of widows.
But please, Rod, not cutting back on coffee. Coffee is God's gift to mankind.
I'm just saying, you got to cut if you're doing 6 cups a day.
Maybe cut back on chocolate bars or something.
Well, okay. Cut back on something.
You're just making a point. That's a good point.
But the idea is that there's needs and there's wants. So I think most of us would agree, and if we didn't agree, we might have some thinking challenges we have to go through. But most of us would agree that what we need and what we want are different. And we need to understand that our devotion and our commitment in terms of responsibility as Christians, people who are Christ-like, people of the way, as they called them in the New Testament, people who are following Christ, people who are trying to do what Jesus Christ did, trying to follow what Jesus Christ showed. This is very important. If we're trying to do that, then we would focus our attention more on giving and helping others to understand that Jesus Christ loves them.
And of course, it's true. It's not by works of righteousness as we've done, but according to his mercy, he saved us. But we're not talking here about salvation. We're talking here about being indwelt by the Spirit of Christ. He's already saved us. And now, being indwelt by the Spirit of Christ, we need to demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit of Christ.
Indeed.
And the fruit of the Spirit of Christ starts with love.
Always love defined by 1 Corinthians chapter 13, not by Hollywood.
Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit.
Exactly.
It just goes on. John, he keeps saying, God is love. God is love.
Yeah.
And then God so loved the world. So, you got to show love for your neighbor. And when you're doing that, God is showing love for your neighbor. It's a no-brainer.
I think it's important to remember that when we talk about love, we're talking about Christ's love, and Christ's love is different than what Hollywood is. They have just demonstrated as love, which is not. They've demonstrated more lust than they have love, and I say that with all honesty. Yeah. I think love is something that is defined, and if you want to look at the definition of love that never fails, you want to look at the definition of things that always hope for the good and always do the good things, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, very important. Yeah. He says the greatest of these, all the gifts of the Spirit are interesting, but if I don't have love, I'm nothing but a clanging cymbal. Yeah. I'm making noise with no reason for the noise. That's the clanging cymbal. Yeah. And we can't just run around clanging all the time. Like I've in 100 Huntley Street, when we did the work there, and there were always people we had to screen through for testimonies and all that. I got to tell you, Jim, there are a lot of clanging cymbals. And we had to work very hard on explaining to people that you didn't get on there just because you're on television.
Sometimes they slip through the net, and you foisted them on me, and I had to interview them.
I'm sorry about that. There's about 4 or 5 times.
I'm sitting down with. It's very clear to me this is a clanging cymbal. Why is Rod giving me this person to interview? But generally speaking, as Jesus said, a tree will be known by its fruit.
Of course.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long to discern whether there's good fruit or bad fruit or no fruit in a person's life. Not that you judge them, but some trees are fruitful, and those are the trees you want to cultivate.
You do. And so we want to just mention that if you want to give or be a part of this, you can go to WOW Missions, WOW Missions.
Not just mission.
Mission, not missions.
No, not missions, mission.
Okay,
MISSION. Yeah.
WOMISSION.com.
Yeah.
.com, not CA, but .com. And you can make a donation there. Very important that we understand that, because that's the one way that you can get a hold of being a part of this.
We're also on Instagram, Wow Mission.
Instagram as well.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Excellent. Instagram is great for the younger folks too, who don't like the fact that moms and dads took over their places. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that you need to think about. Maybe I can give today. Maybe I can give $1 a month, $2. Maybe some people can give $100. Doesn't matter. But you need to be a part of this, because this is exactly what God is telling us to do. This is exactly what we do. When he says go into all the world and spread the good news, that's not the end of it. The end of it is and teach the people the things I taught them. What did Jesus teach us when he was talking to the woman at the well? When he was doing all of these different things, he taught us to give, beloved. And so we need to give. We need to understand that. So my invitation to you is simple, and that is to make sure that you pray about it. And if you're watching this podcast, let me tell you something. You're not watching by accident. It's not an accident. It's not, I just came across this podcast. No, you're here because the Lord has drawn you here. So if you're watching this podcast, that is exactly why you need to pray about this and make sure that God has really touched your heart. Jim, thank you so much for being on.
Pleasure, Rodney.
It's great.
By the way, when you use the word beloved, you reminded me of your father.
And that's interesting, but I use beloved. I thank you for that, but I use beloved because Paul used it.
Yeah, of course.
And
it has a lot of meaning, too. Your dad was the only one I ever heard in a pulpit who used that term.
Really?
Yeah, I never heard another pastor talk to his congregation as the beloved.
The loved of God.
The loved of God.
Yeah.
And that's who your viewers are. They're the loved of God. And, together, as we're loved by God, let's try to show his love to the world.
That sounds good to me. Okay, thank you for being with us. We'll let you go, and we'll see you next week. Janice, we'll see you next week.